Power versus authority. I want to start with a simple idea that has stayed with me since I was a teenager. Power versus authority. I remember being in a government class. My teacher, who was also my soccer coach, he started the class by writing that on the board, power versus authority. He walked up and down the rows of desks. He stopped at my desk, which was in the front of the room. And he flipped my desk over with me in it. He stood over me. He explained that he had the power to do that because he was bigger than me. He had the authority to do so because of the system that he stood in as my teacher, my coach, and the institution. The lesson was this, though. Power is what you can do. Authority is what you're legitimized to do. Those two things get confused all the time, especially at the level of governments, militaries, and empires. And that confusion is at the center of what's happening right now in Venezuela. I'm Venezuelan American. Venezuela isn't a headline for me. It's my family, my history, my entire life. I don't want to react emotionally to news. I want to reflect as someone who's watched patterns play out for over 2 decades. Let me say this clearly and upfront. Maduro needed to go. The suffering was real. Internal political paths were crushed. Doing nothing was no longer neutral. It guaranteed continued collapse. I'm not defending dictatorship. I'm not romanticizing suffering. I'm not necessarily anti-intervention. What I'm questioning is how power is used, how it's framed, what precedent that sets. To understand Venezuela, you can't start in 2025 or 2026. You have to go back. Hugo Chavez attempted a coup in 1992. He failed, was jailed, and then came out and was forgiven by the government. That forgiveness, it mattered, because he later came to power in 1999 off of populism, riding real anger, real inequality, real corruption. Populism turned into consolidation. The institutions, they weakened. Checks, money started disappearing. By the time Maduro took over in 2013, the system was already hollow. Then came sanctions. This part matters. Sanctions don't just pressure leaders. They intentionally collapse economies secondhand. They shrink food access. They destroy currency. They radicalize power. When a country is isolated, it turns to whoever will trade. That's how China, Russia, Iran, and Cuba enter the picture. Not just as ideology, but as survival. Later, those same relationships, they get framed as existential threats, which become justification for intervention. The sequence, it matters. Sanctions turn to intentional economic collapse. Then that naturally turns to authoritarian consolidation, which will then also naturally turn to foreign alliances, which of course will later justify intervention. If you ignore the beginning of the chain, the end looks inevitable. If you acknowledge the chain, the responsibility becomes shared. Let's talk about language, because language comes before action. When people say, Venezuela is our backyard, that's not about proximity. You could say a nearby country or a neighboring nation or a country in the same hemisphere just a flight away. Backyard is ownership language. Once something is framed as backyard, intervention starts to feel natural, protective, even entitled. From the outside, that doesn't sound like care. It sounds like possessive. That language has been used for over a century to justify intervention in Latin America. Different presidents, same framing. And framing is how power disguises itself as responsibility. Here is where the power versus authority comes back into play. Yes, the US has the power to remove Maduro, but the power alone does not equal authority. Authority comes from legitimacy, restraint, and precedent. This wasn't just intervention. It was for performance. It was loud, it was public, it was a spectacle, it was symbolic. It wasn't only about removing a dictator. It was about signaling dominance. That signaling is the issue. Because if legitimacy is enforced by force, legitimacy then belongs to whoever has the biggest arsenal, not the strongest mandates. That logic doesn't just stay in Venezuela. It becomes reusable to any nation in the world. Here's the uncomfortable truth. If the sole objective was removing Maduro, there were other options. The US has extracted leaders quietly before. No highlight reels, no Instagram reels, no TikToks, no press conferences explaining all the weapons they used to do it. Imagine this instead. You wake up and the news just says Maduro's in court in handcuffs in a New York courtroom. No spectacle, no performance, just justice and accountability. That would have been power with authority. That would have been real power, because authority doesn't need to announce itself. Now, I want to be very clear about something. This is not a left position and this is not a right position. I don't align with either echo chamber. The radical left destroyed Venezuela through Chavismo, and blind nationalism destroys accountability everywhere else. I'm proud to be American. I'm proud to be Venezuelano. I'm gringo Venezolano. And I'm critical of any system when power forgets restraint. Those things aren't contradictions. I'm hopeful right now, but not certain. I celebrate the end of a dictatorship, but history teaches us to ask, what happens next? If Venezuelans are given real agency, sovereignty, and the ability to rebuild without extraction or control, maybe this breaks a cycle. But if not, I don't think it was just about liberation. It was about replacement. And history shows us the pattern. Different flags, same logic. But this is where I want to slow things down. This is where I want to slow things down. Because history doesn't argue with emotion. It teaches through repetition. And if more people studied history, not headlines, not algorithms, not talking points or trends, but cause and consequence, we'd probably be more careful with the rules we write through action. Because those rules, they don't disappear when the news cycles move on. Countries live with them. Families live with them. Generations live with them. I'm not claiming certainty, I'm naming patterns. And I'm asking for awareness and perspective. Because power without restraint, it becomes performance. And performance without accountability becomes empire. So I'll end with this first in Spanish and then in English. Porque la historia no pasa, queda contigo. History doesn't pass, it waits inside you. Peace.